Secretary Austin in Kyiv, face-to-face with the former president still claiming to hold office. Zelensky said, "Here's another 400 million for you. Isn't that right down a rat hole?" Well, of course it is, but 400 million is chunk change. We've wasted billions and billions and billions of dollars. We have no idea how much we've wasted. We know that a large portion of the equipment, some people say as much as a third, some say 25%, that we have provided to the Ukrainians has been sold on the black market to other buyers. And this money will certainly subsidize the government and the leadership of the military. Everybody asks, well, why haven't the Ukrainian generals stepped forward and been heard? Well, they're being well paid. Why does the parliament stand up and give Zelensky a standing ovation? They're all well paid. This is one giant grift. Ladies and gentlemen, the Kherson offensive has become a major turning point in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. 3 months have passed since this offensive began, and instead of achieving its strategic goals, Ukraine now faces severe military and economic setbacks that threaten the very existence of the Ukrainian state. As Colonel Douglas McGregor observed, this battle demonstrates the folly of Ukraine's strategy under Western influence. Kherson has turned into a disaster for Ukraine, as Russian forces maintain their iron grip, gradually dismantling Kiev's war efforts piece by piece. In a desperate attempt to turn the tide, Ukraine has deployed 11 elite brigades out of its 36 combat brigades, supported by state-of-the-art weaponry from the US and NATO. Confident in their numerical strength and Western backing, Ukrainian forces rushed into Kherson hoping for a decisive breakthrough. But instead, they walked straight into a Russian trap. On the eastern front, Russian forces peel away layers of Ukrainian defenses, inching closer to the twin cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. With Donetsk and Luhansk already within reach, their full liberation is only a matter of time. There is no doubt now, Ukraine's gamble in Kherson was a colossal error, and NATO's strategic miscalculation only adds to Kiev's deepening crisis. But this military failure is just the beginning. Ukraine now faces even bigger consequences off the battlefield. On October 21, 2024, President Zelensky admitted during an interview with the Financial Times that Ukraine is ready to negotiate, but only if Russia halts airstrikes on its energy infrastructure and cargo vessels. This desperate plea reflects the dire economic reality Kyiv now faces. Zelensky is asking for Russia's mercy, hoping for humanitarian relief to signal a path toward peace talks. But let's be realistic, Ukraine itself violated multiple agreements in the past, and now it pleads for diplomacy as if Russia will suddenly forget everything. As President Putin once warned, Russia's terms will only grow harsher with every betrayal. In this game, only surrender will bring results. Let's rewind to late 2022 when Russia launched targeted strikes on Ukraine's electrical substations. These attacks forced Ukraine to expose its advanced S-300 air defense systems, which allowed Russia to systematically destroy these assets over the fall and winter months in 2023 and 2024. Ukraine retaliated by sending drones to target Russian oil refineries, temporarily disrupting fuel production and halting exports. As Colonel Douglas McGregor emphasized, Russia's methodical approach in neutralizing Ukraine's air defenses was key to shifting the balance of power. Now the focus has shifted entirely to destroying Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Russia responded swiftly by escalating strikes on Ukraine's power grid, no longer focusing on air defenses but crippling Ukraine's entire energy infrastructure. This time, not only substations but large power plants were targeted, leaving non-nuclear electricity production in ruins. However, just as Ukraine's economy teetered on collapse, a diplomatic lifeline seemed to emerge in August 2024. Russia and Ukraine were scheduled to meet in Doha, Qatar, in what seemed like a last-ditch attempt to end attacks on each other's infrastructure. The Washington Post reported that these talks represented a rare glimmer of hope, with negotiators on both sides exploring terms for a partial ceasefire. The agreement would focus on protecting critical infrastructure, particularly energy networks and ports. This was seen as an opportunity to de-escalate the conflict and reduce the mounting economic strain on both nations. However, those hopes were shattered when Ukraine, instead of waiting for diplomacy to run its course, launched a surprise attack on Kyiv. This offensive not only violated the spirit of the negotiations, but also confirmed Russia's long-standing concerns about Ukraine's unreliability at the negotiation table. The Doha talks, already fragile, collapsed immediately. Any trust in future peace negotiations evaporated, leaving both sides entrenched deeper in their respective positions. For Russia, the message was clear: diplomacy would no longer be an option. As Colonel Douglas McGregor pointed out, K's continuous preference for escalation over diplomacy only ensured that the conflict would drag on with increasingly harsh consequences for Ukraine. And with peace off the table, Russia's focus turned to the Black Sea, where a new front in economic warfare was about to unfold. Following the failure of the Doha negotiations, Russia withdrew from the Black Sea grain agreement and swiftly reimposed a naval blockade on Ukrainian ports. This move effectively severed Ukraine's access to global markets, cutting off vital exports of grain and other commodities. Under the leadership of Defense Minister Bov, Russia escalated its campaign by targeting Ukraine's Dark Fleet, a covert network of 22 civilian cargo ships used to smuggle weapons disguised as grain shipments. Over the next few months, Russian Iskander missiles precisely targeted and destroyed these vessels, most of which were anchored in Odessa and surrounding ports. This operation dealt a devastating blow to Ukraine's logistical network. The destruction of the Dark Fleet confirmed what Colonel Douglas McGregor had warned about earlier, that Ukraine's over-reliance on covert Western-backed operations left it increasingly exposed to Russian retaliation. Now, no insurer in the world is willing to cover ships heading to Ukraine, as the lethal precision of Russian strikes has turned the Black Sea into a danger zone. With shipping routes compromised and ports under constant threat, Ukraine's trade routes have effectively vanished, deepening the economic chokehold imposed by Russia. With Ukraine's maritime options dwindling, the course of the war now shifts decisively toward winter's looming threat and Kiev's missed opportunities for peace. Throughout this conflict, Ukraine had at least 3 key chances to pursue peace, but each time it chose escalation over diplomacy, leaving the path to surrender as its only remaining option. The Istanbul Agreement in March 2022, brokered by Turkey, was Ukraine's best chance to negotiate a favorable settlement and end the conflict early. But Zelensky, under Western pressure, rejected the deal, convinced that more Western military aid would change the tide of the war. Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of the UK, was even reported to have personally intervened to block the agreement, ensuring Ukraine stayed on a war footing. The second missed opportunity was the Black Sea Grain Agreement, a critical lifeline for Ukraine's economy. But instead of honoring the agreement, Ukraine exploited these commercial routes to launch military operations, using cargo ships as makeshift platforms for drone and missile attacks on Russian targets. This violation caused Russia to pull out of the agreement and reimpose a strict blockade, shutting down Ukraine's last viable trade routes. Finally, the Doha talks in August 2024 were poised to offer a way out of the conflict, with both sides prepared to negotiate an end to attacks on infrastructure. However, Ukraine sabotaged these efforts by launching its offensive on Kherson, leaving Russia with no incentive to return to the negotiating table. As winter rapidly approaches, Ukraine faces the full brunt of its decisions. The economy is crumbling, infrastructure is in ruins, and Western support is faltering. As Colonel Douglas McGregor has noted, the consequences of Kiev's missteps are now unavoidable. No more diplomatic lifelines remain. Russia's message is clear: the war will only end when Ukraine surrenders. And with winter descending upon a battered Ukraine, the window for survival is closing rapidly, leaving Kiev to face the harsh reality of unconditional surrender. In Moldova, the first round of the presidential elections has come to a close. And while incumbent President Maia Sandu leads the race, she did not secure the necessary 50% of the vote to win outright. As a result, Moldova is now heading for a second round of elections, where Sandu will face off against her closest rival. The stakes are high for Moldova, with the country deeply divided between those seeking European integration and those favoring a more neutral stance to avoid antagonizing Russia. Sandu, known for her pro-European platform, enjoys strong backing from Western countries, but many in Moldova's rural areas and older voters remain skeptical of such alignment, fearing that closer ties to the West could lead to economic instability and social upheaval. What complicates matters further are allegations of Russian interference. Western sources claim that Moscow has attempted to influence the election, but initial results reveal that a large share of Sandu's support comes from the Moldovan diaspora abroad, especially from those living in Western Europe. This highlights how the Moldovan diaspora plays a decisive role, with many overseas voters pushing for reforms and closer alignment with the European Union. However, Russia's influence still casts a long shadow over Moldova. The second round will undoubtedly become a battleground for Moldova's future direction, whether it follows the path toward European integration or remains cautious in its geopolitical stance. the fear of Russian economic retaliation or the possibility of internal unrest looms large, adding further pressure to the already tense election process. As the election campaign intensifies ahead of the second round, regional tensions grow. Moldova must navigate this politically volatile landscape, and the outcome could shape its foreign policy for years to come. While Moldova braces for its decisive second round, nearby Georgia plunges deeper into political turmoil after its own contentious election. Over in Georgia, the ruling party, Georgian Dream, has declared victory in the recent parliamentary elections, defying pressure from Western-backed opposition groups. However, the opposition coalition, which includes President Salome Zurabichvili, has refused to recognize the results, alleging election fraud and manipulation. Tensions are running high, with Zurabichvili and other opposition leaders calling for mass protests on October 28 to contest the legitimacy of the vote. The political landscape in Georgia is becoming increasingly polarized, with Western powers supporting opposition factions and pushing for pro-EU reforms. But public sentiment, as reflected in the election, shows a clear tilt toward pro-Russian policies. The victory of Georgian Dream signals that many Georgian voters prefer stability over integration with the European Union, fearing that Western interference could destabilize the country further. This creates significant obstacles for Georgia's EU membership ambitions, adding to its ongoing political struggle. Kaka Kaladze, the Secretary General of Georgian Dream, emphasized that their election victory reflects the will of the people and dismissed Western concerns about the country's drift toward Russia. This shift in public sentiment highlights how ordinary voters are prioritizing economic security over political alliances, favoring neutrality and stability over the uncertain promises of EU integration. Adding to the complexity are the breakaway regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which continue to play a critical role in Georgia's geopolitical dynamics. These regions, which enjoy Russian support, remain potential flashpoints for future conflicts, further complicating Georgia's relationship with both Russia and the West. The upcoming protests on October 28 are expected to be a pivotal moment. If unrest spreads, the political crisis could deepen, weakening the government and derailing the country's fragile stability. The situation is already volatile, with both sides entrenched in their positions, leaving little room for compromise. Colonel Douglas McGregor has previously warned about Georgia's geopolitical vulnerability, noting that external pressures from the West and internal divisions make it difficult for the country to chart an independent course. As Georgia continues to walk a fine line between Russia and the EU, its political future hangs in the balance. With Moldova heading into a second round of elections and Georgia teetering on the brink of political unrest, the region faces a period of profound uncertainty, one where Russia's influence remains a dominant force. As these elections in Moldova and Georgia unfold, it's clear that the regional dynamics are shifting, with Russia's influence growing while Western-backed initiatives meet increasing resistance. Moldova's second round will decide its political future, while Georgia's unrest could spiral into widespread protests, further complicating the region's already volatile political landscape. Stay tuned as we continue to bring updates on these developments and track the latest shifts in this critical geopolitical battleground.